to shetalksgreen, where we dive into the pressing issues of sustainability and explore actionable solutions for a greener future. Today, we tackle one of the most urgent challenges of our times: transportation and its staggering contribution to pollution. To help us unpack these questions, we have a very special guest today, Dr. P Agarwal. He is a former CEO of the World Resources Institute and now a senior advisor there. He's one of India's foremost experts on urban governance, transportation, and development. With decades of experience in the Indian administrative services and key positions in the Government of India and Assam, he brings a wealth of knowledge and invaluable insights to this conversation. Sir, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure, Arpita. Delighted to be able to speak to you and to your audience, a topic that I am very fond of. Thank you.
So before we dive into our topic today, I'd definitely like to get your comments on the outcome of COP29. COP29 in Baku, which we recently concluded, widely was regarded as the finance COP. Well, unfortunately, it has left many disappointed due to the limited progress we made on the climate finance. How do you view its outcomes, particularly in the context of India's ambitious clean energy and climate goals?
Well, I'm honestly not surprised at the outcome. Climate finance has been an issue for quite some time. The kind of money that is claimed to be needed is way beyond the kind of money that is getting committed. So even though there is a strong push towards meeting certain physical commitments, the commitments on finance are not really showing up. And it's not just Baku. A lot of the previous COPs have really been sort of demonstrating this kind of a gap. Now, what is important for countries is not just to say that, look, the money is not there, so we can't do anything. But we have to start doing things with whatever is available. And I think there's quite a bit that can still happen. And I think in many ways, India led a lot of the thinking when the Prime Minister announced this whole concept of lifestyle for the environment. The whole problem got created because our life became, we were indisciplined. And he's reminding the rest of the world that, look, if you learn how to behave well, a lot of these problems get sorted out and they don't need money. So I think we need to start looking at things that we can do with whatever we have and not just say that we don't have enough money, so wait for the money to come. But the outcome of Baku, I'm not surprised.
Absolutely, sir. I think you made an excellent point that while our leaders go on these global platforms and keep negotiating and hoping that we do get this funds and finance, that's important. But at the same time, there's a lot of responsibility with all of us to make those small changes that is going to definitely help in our path to sustainability. Now, coming back to our topic, I came across a study by a think tank that predicts transport emissions in India could significantly increase if vehicle growth and fuel policies continue the way we have it right now. Currently, transportation contributes about 12% of India's carbon emissions from energy use, and it could become the second largest emitter by 2030. And 2030 is not far away. So at the same time, the government of India has also some ambitious goals to achieve, EV sales. Now it's somewhere around 30% in private cars, 70% in commercial vehicles, 40% in buses, and 80% in two-wheelers and three-wheelers, all by 2030, which potentially would put around 80 million EVs on Indian roads. Given these targets, how well do you think India's transport sector is positioned to balance its rapid growth with the goal of reducing emissions? Do you think the current policies as we stand today and the infrastructure Is it sufficient to align with these targets and help us meet the zero emission goals that we have put for 2070?
Arpita, let me try to answer this question. A very good question. Let me try to answer it in two or three different parts. I think one part of your question related to whether the emissions growth from the transport sector is going to increase. The second part of your question was about EVs and whether EVs are going to, the infrastructure is available for the kind of EV growth that is being aimed for. So, as far as the emissions growth is concerned, yes, emissions from the transport sector in India will grow. And they will again grow for multiple reasons. One is we are a country which is urbanizing rapidly. In the next 30 years, our urban population, which is roughly about 400 million today, will go up to 800 million or more than 800 million. So, urbanization leads to more motorized transport, and that itself will lead to significant growth in emissions if our mobility systems remain the way they are today. That is one. The second is if you look at non urban transport. In non urban transport, the big emitter is highway trucks, freight movements. And we have aimed at a nearly tenfold growth in our economy. We're talking of growing from being a $3 trillion economy to a $30 trillion economy by 2047. Now, economic growth means movement of goods, and goods movements will happen to a lot. Again, today's mode share, as they call it, trucking is the biggest contributor. Most of our goods are transported on trucking, even though the National Transport Policy recommends a bigger share of rail. That has not happened. So I think both in goods movements and in urban passenger movements, growth of emissions will take place if we continue the way we have been doing as of now. That's one part of it. Coming to EVs, yes, we have ambitious goals that we have set for EVs. I think the big challenge on EVs is not what we can do tomorrow or what we're going to do to after, or what we can do in terms of whether 80 million vehicles will come on the roads and all of that. I think the big challenge is if we are going to get to 80 million vehicles, do we have the kind of electricity we need to fuel the vehicles? What's going to happen to the batteries that will become out of use from the cars? How do we recycle them? How do we scrap them? What will that kind of an increased load have on our grid? Electricity grid, particularly if a lot of these vehicles are going to start up at a certain point of time, the electricity grid will trip. So there are a lot of these things that we need to study, we need to look at now itself, so that we are prepared for what will happen when 80 million vehicles come on the road. I think that's the kind of futuristic work that has not yet happened. I know that a number of think tanks are talking about it, but I think it needs some coordinated effort to do that kind of work. I would be more worried about that. What will also happen is a lot of the movement systems may need some changing. Mainly because IC engine vehicles, once you fill it up, it takes less than 5 minutes to fill it up. You can travel almost 300, 400 kilometers on one filling. Your travel pattern is very flexible. Whereas with EVs, it may take you 3 or 4 hours to fill in, energize the battery. And it gives you only 200 or 300 kilometers with one energizing, which may take 3 or 4 hours. So your movement patterns can often get affected. So this is the kind of thing that we need to think about and reprogram how we move around. Uh, this is my response to your question. That one, we must recognize that emissions will grow, and we must do something to make sure that the way we have been doing things all this while changes. Second, EVs should grow. In my view, they should grow. They will grow to a large number. But let's start preparing for the kind of challenges those pose if they grow to the kind of numbers that are being projected.
Absolutely. And I'll come to EVs, particularly the kind of challenges or the narratives that we are seeing. But since you were discussing some of the challenges that we are facing in our progress to decarbonizing the transport sector, can we discuss a few unique challenges that India particularly face compared to other emerging economies? Because we are seeing different kind of trends with respect to EVs as well and other alternative fuels. But while India is making a lot of progress with its policies across alternative fuels, including EVs, the adoption do seem to be slightly slow, if I may say that. So, what are these unique challenges that India particularly faces?
So I think the one unique challenge is its size and also the form of government we have. We are a democracy. We can't force things on people that some other countries may be able to do so. So we are democratic. People vote for the government every 5 years, and governments can't force certain things which people are not yet convinced about. So I think what India needs to do is, given its size and given its form of government, rather than forcing something through regulation, a lot more has to happen through persuasion or through pointing out the advantages. Now, to my mind, government has in India not yet come out with any law which will force people to do something, but has instead used the route of incentives to persuade to do. So that what happens with incentives is, if you do this, you get this carrot, but if you don't do it, that's your call. I think that that's a good approach to follow, and frankly, I for one am actually surprised at the pace of growth that I have seen. I have never thought that this would be the kind of pace we would achieve. I'm frankly very happy to see this pace of growth. The initial years are always challenging because people want to look at what somebody else has done before they do it. And I honestly feel the growth in EVs will be exponential as we go further. I think that initial threshold, or what they call the tipping point, we've already got to that. What we now have to make sure is that the infrastructure, the other facilities that we need are in place. And I must say that it has happened faster than I.
Absolutely. And, we were talking about some of the challenges. And this is one observation that I have had after following many discussions and many stakeholders talking about it. Beyond the high level commitments, goals, negotiations that we keep happening on all these global platforms, a significant challenge lies in bridging the gap between what we commit on these negotiation tables and the actual on ground implementation. Now, some of the things that do emerge when we talk about these gaps and challenges is financing. Certainly, it remains a persistent sticking point. But there's also a notable gap in capacity building. Those responsible for translating these ambitious goals and policies often lack the necessary training and resources. In your view, how can India address this challenge of building the capacity needed to scale the sustainable mobility effectively and to a level that we are envisioning? And what steps we can take to ensure that these policies actually lead to some meaningful action on the ground?
You've said something that is music to my ears. And my request to you, say it repeatedly through your channels. Uh, Let me put it in sharper language. All these negotiations amongst the climate experts have, over the years, created a club. And that club has a certain vocabulary which nobody outside the club understands. I sometimes suspect they don't want others to understand it also. But this gap between what is being talked about at one level is all stratospheric. what we see on the ground as people being able to understand something, believe me, many of them said, "हाँ, climate सुना है, क्या होता है मालूम नहीं." This is the huge gap.
Absolutely, sir.
I'm also sorry to say that a lot of these people who talk about climate, go to COPs and discuss about climate, also are working on the ground, are doing precious little to build that capacity on the ground. In WRI, we developed a program that we call the Leaders in Climate Change Management, LCCM. The primary objective was to get people at the ground level to understand what is climate. And given that we were a small organization, is only one NGO, our target was we'll do 5,000 people across the country. But then for doing all of that, we needed support, we needed funds, small amount. The kind of funds we were looking for is not $1 trillion. We were looking for much smaller amounts. Even that was not forthcoming. So we were able to do it in one state where they've done three rounds of these programs in Karnataka, but unfortunately couldn't get traction elsewhere. So I think these programs need to happen. I think capacity needs to get built. Otherwise, there'll be a talk shop at one end and nothing happening at the other end. And I'm sorry to say that these people who talk climate there are doing precious little to realize that they're not understood outside that club.
Absolutely, sir. I think we both said it that somehow, and especially in the recent past, you see that every year we come up with new acronyms, fancy terms, more jargon, and people, largely the vulnerable community who's impacted because of the climate change that we all are going, and talking about, they do not understand all of this, and they
Why
are
do you
not
talk about
empowered enough.
vulnerable? Why are you talking about vulnerable communities? Officials in the municipal corporations, large municipal corporations on the country, we used to deal with them a lot in WRI. They said, we've heard about it, but we don't know what we're supposed to do. That is the reality on the ground.
Wow. I mean, we certainly need to change that because we can't keep talking about climate in isolation while the rest of us feel so distant from all the discussions and policies which are practically being made for us, but we don't know anything about it. Since we are talking about urban transportation planning in India has historically focused on moving vehicles rather than people, leading to underdeveloped public transit networks. Now, we did try to address it when we made a shift under the National Urban Transport Policy. Private vehicle usage still dominates. I mean, there is no doubt about it. Public transport in urban areas are still underutilized. We have made progress, metros, buses, whatnot, but there's a long way to go. How can India address infrastructural and behavioral barriers to improve its uptake? Because we need to encourage people to shift from private vehicles, especially the two wheelers, to public transport in an era which is dominated by 10-minute deliveries and a preference for convenience. Do you think there is a way to reverse the trend?
Yes, yes, yes. Let's okay. That's a very interesting point you bring up. Let me respond to that with two statements. One is the way we are going about it in many of the cities. You imagine an analogy. If a human body is made and you place a heart in the human body, but you forget to place all those veins and arteries and all of them, will blood flow?
No.
You've just put a heart, but you haven't put those arteries, the veins, the capillaries that take blood to all the nooks and corners of the human body. If you don't have any of that, will the heart alone help you with blood flow? Frankly, that's what we've been doing. We built the metro, but we haven't provided connectivity to the metro through a range of other ways
Absolutely.
in which people can move to their homes and their offices. We make
Yeah.
a lot of noise about the metro system. Metro has been built and we think it will solve the problem. No, it can't solve the problem. We're spending large amounts of money on that metro, but not spending a fraction of that to provide those veins and arteries that are needed. Uh, I often think of it as, looking at it as an engineering solution, not as an urban transport solution. So we're putting in engineering solutions like a metro, but not thinking like an urban transport planner and say that where will people go from the metro station? This has been the problem as far as metros are concerned. That's why you see consistently, even Delhi, the kind of ridership that we are seeing on the metros is far, far lower than what we thought it would be. This is as far as metros are concerned. Let's look at bus systems. What are we doing with bus systems? You see, when bus systems were put in place in the beginning, the whole idea was that there are poor people who can't afford a personal motor vehicle and they need some kind of transport. And because they are poor, whatever transport system we put in place, affordability is the most important factor. They must be affordable. Then we had this urban transport policy, which was adopted in 2006, where we recognized that, hey, it's not just the poor people who need to use buses. We also want people in two-wheelers and cars to move to buses. But for this group, it's not affordability that is the important factor. For this group, it's quality that's the important factor. Now, if you want to give better quality, affordability is compromised. This is the dilemma that is faced. How do we balance affordability with quality? And to my mind, the answer to that really lies in having two different types of services. You have a base service that is affordable, which people who have a challenge in paying should be able to sort of use that. And if government has to subsidize that, so be it. But then there is a category that we want should move to public transport. For them, we need much higher quality. We need much more convenience. They are willing to pay more. There's no need for government subsidy. But government has to create that environment where people come in and provide those higher level services. And let me give you a concrete example that I myself had gone through, of course, several years ago. Delhi at one stage had these chartered buses. I don't know if you heard about them. They had chartered buses. The chartered buses charged a lot more than the normal DTC buses.
Yeah.
I used to live in Vasant Kunj, and my office was in Udyog Bhavan. It was about 17 odd kilometers away. And this I'm talking of 91 to 93, so I'm talking of almost 30 years ago. Every morning, I didn't have a car then, I only had a two-wheeler. And every morning, my challenge was, should I take my scooter or should I take the chartered bus? When I took the scooter, by the time I reached office, I had just negotiated harrowing traffic. In the summer, with that helmet, you're all messy inside. And after reaching the office, I had to tell myself, it took me half an hour to convince myself that I'm alive. But the days I took the chartered bus, I had read the morning newspaper. I was absolutely fine. I reached the office. I could start working right away. Now, the question you would have is, in that case, why did I ever take my two-wheeler? Right? The reason I took my two-wheeler on some days was because my boss had fixed a meeting at 4 p.m. or later. And I wasn't certain I would get a chartered bus to come back. I didn't want to take the DTC bus. Now, if this can be scaled up and you have a whole service of these so-called premium buses, I think a lot of two-wheeler users in Delhi are not happy using the two-wheelers because it's unsafe, it's messy.
Yeah,
They will
absolutely.
move to it. But governments in various states, I'm not blaming any particular party or this thing, but across the board, I'm even saying policymakers are refusing to understand that when you need better bus services, it needs a better quality of bus services, not just more buses of the same type. If you put in more buses of the same type, you'll have road space getting occupied, but the passenger numbers won't go up.
Right.
So, two things I mentioned in this: look at metro systems as comprehensive, not just an engineering a civil engineer's paradise of having built a metro and ribboned and opened it up, but a whole network of support systems, and look at a set of premium buses that motor vehicle owners will be willing to shift to.
Right. Sir, how are we doing in the smaller cities? I mean, I still think that while there are some challenges, but tier two, tier one cities are fairly better when it comes to public transport. But the uptake in smaller cities, tier three cities, is very low. How can we make public transport accessible in these smaller cities?
You see, I would say that what we don't see in the tier three and the other smaller cities is the kind of bus systems or metro systems that we have got used to in the tier one and tier two cities. But I would not agree that you don't have public transport there. The public transport takes different forms. So, auto rickshaws, for example, are there in all the tier three cities. Auto rickshaws are also a form of public transport. This is often referred to as intermediate public transport. So, in smaller cities where volumes are lower, bus systems won't get the kind of passenger usage that you would want to see when you invest in a bus. So, smaller vehicles make more sense. And the smaller vehicles in some of the tier 3 cities may be minibuses. In some, it may be auto rickshaws. In some, Delhi has seen this in the past, the so called fatfatis. So, you may not see the kind of public transport system that you see in the bigger cities. They are there in a different form, often not visible. But I think tier 3 cities also have some kind of public transport. They are smaller, volumes are less, travel distances are lower. Often people just cycle to those places. Often they just walk to those places because smaller cities, that's the advantage you have.
Right. I mean, I come from a small town, and frankly, all I have ever seen in terms of public transport was the rickshaws operated by humans, not those battery operated or the three-wheeler autos that we are talking about. Or people would just take lift from their neighboring people who are using their vehicles. And that brings me to another challenge that we see, and here's a story to tell. So recently, one of my friend from Germany was visiting me, and after traveling a bit with me to tier two to metro cities, she asked me that why there are so many cars with only one person driving, or basically one seat occupied, and so many empty seats. I mean, it was a hard question for me because while I certainly acknowledge that shared mobility is an absolutely important solution, part of the solution. But given India's unique challenges and including safety concerns, and I say that as a woman, that safety certainly is my first priority, it seems a very difficult task to accomplish. The more I think about it, I always, face this dilemma that how do we promote shared mobility while keeping convenience as well as safety in mind?
I think this is where, a nudge from the government and some of their policies need a bit of a change. Now, efforts have been made. Many people who've met me have pointed out to certain challenges they faced. A number of uh, carpool systems have come up in a number of cities. So people have set up platforms where someone who's traveling from one place to another can put his travel program on a platform, and someone else who wants to travel the same route can pick it up and get a ride. So a lot of these private startups tried this, but a few of them said that we got harassed by the police, we got harassed by the transport people, mainly because they said regulations don't seem to permit this. The moment you're carrying someone else and getting some money out of that person, you're now a commercial vehicle, you're not a private vehicle. So we have this big difference between private vehicles and commercial vehicles. So they say the moment you've taken somebody, you need to get a different kind of driver's license. You need to get a different kind of registration for your car because you're carrying a passenger who's contributing to the cost of your movement. What these people had done was they said, okay, if you're taking a ride with someone, you contribute to the price of the fuel that he uses, which is fair. But this is where we've got stuck. This whole difference between a commercial vehicle and a private vehicle. I, for one, it's a bit of a borderline case, but I think in the larger public policy interest, we should encourage it, not discourage it. In some cases, there is also this issue of, is this vehicle safe? Is someone who's carrying you, you don't know, and you, in good faith, you take a ride with that person, but that person is not safe. Has that person's police verification been done? So here, what the administrative system is doing is trying to put in place a system that is safe for you, and you don't get into a vehicle not knowing that that person is. So this is a good intent, but good intents also must lead to success in some form. So there's no point of saying that since the driver has not got a police verification, it's not safe for you to take that, so we won't permit it. You have to find a way to make it possible. Now, this is what I always say, often what is publicly needed and regulation, there is a time lag. It takes time for regulations to catch up on what is the demand of society. And that is the time lag that we are seeing here. But I think these ride sharing need to happen. You take Uber. You see, Uber in most other countries has a concept of Uber pool. So you can share an Uber. And I've seen people who in the US, they take an Uber pool, the price is very low.
Yeah.
Sometimes it means, little deviations which delays the travel time a bit, but they're willing to accept that for a lower price. In India, somehow Uber pool has not picked up at all.
Yeah, we introduced it. Both Ola and Uber had it. At one point, I used it, but again, I think I would point out safety as one of the major challenges.
Exactly. So I think one, what many people have told me is that I'm willing to take an Uber pool, but most of the Ubers are these small vehicles. And in a small vehicle, if you're sitting behind, you're really touching the other person's shoulder. And no woman would like to travel in a vehicle like that if her shoulder is touching the other person who's a male. So I think the kind of vehicles that got popular with Uber are not conducive to Uber pools. So these are some of the challenges. We have to think about it and find ways of getting around that. But I think some kind of vehicle sharing is extremely important. And I think your friend from Germany had a very good observation. The reason I'm saying that also is I believe an empty seat in any moving vehicle is a wasted resource.
Absolutely.
You've consumed the fuel, you've used up the road space, you've caused the emission, but 2 seats or 3 seats are empty. And it's
Right.
going to get even worse
And
because everyone is now able to afford an SUV or a bigger vehicle, and
yes,
still it's just one person traveling.
not just that, a lot of families are now owning more than one cars.
Exactly, exactly,
So
exactly.
it is certainly a dilemma that we need to think more about, and we need to find a solution. And while we do that, a couple of other suggestions when we talk about the infrastructure of mobility is cycling and walking as one of the other alternatives. Now, I have always had this discussion where a lot of people say that we should opt for cycling and walking if it is possible as a choice that lies with us, certainly. But I also feel that with the kind of climate change impact that we are seeing, 48-degree temperatures or more than that in at least Delhi NCR and many other cities across India, or floodings and unsafe roads and road accidents, it's a very difficult choice to make for most. How do you think, we can scale it up in major Indian cities, particularly in urban areas? I'm talking about. Um,
You see, two, three things on this. I think one, a lot of this cycling and walking emphasis that is coming from countries in Europe who've done a good job of this. Netherlands is a classic example where uh, people use a bicycle and then a train or a bus, even if they are using three-piece suits. So we must recognize that weather conditions there are very different from weather conditions here,
yeah.
and travel distances there are very different from travel distances in here. So I'm not saying this to say that no, we should not be doing cycling and walking. We should certainly do that. But let's not get into there that 80% of our trips will happen on cycles and all that. Our sizes in the large cities are very different. Second, as you very rightly say, temperatures, both in summer and in winter, they're not really conducive to that kind of walking and cycling that Europe can do. But where we can do well is, honestly, we have been very heavily focused on providing space for cars. And roads have got widened at the cost of footpaths. This is something that must stop, and must stop brutally. Every road must have a sidewalk, and a sidewalk of a reasonable width where people can walk on it. Our design of the sidewalks is pathetic, really pathetic, and I'll give you examples on that. Uh, what happens is, if you look at most sidewalks in Delhi, the height of the sidewalk is much higher than what you would see in most other cities in an urban context. This is because our road designs are following something called the IRCC code, Indian Roads Congress, something kind of a code, where the sidewalk is much higher than it should be in an urban area. Now, the moment the sidewalk is high and you have portions of the sidewalk which are not walkable because there is some muck lying there, or some lamppost there, or some tree planted there, you have to keep going under the tree, people tend to come off the road. And once they come off the road, they don't like to climb back into the sidewalk. So the design of our sidewalks is very important. The height is too high, the width is too little. That's one. Second, we need to start thinking of sidewalks which have shade. Well-designed sidewalks will have shade, will have plants, will have some kind of green cover, will have places where people can, you can have a bit of a shelter and a bench or something, people can sit. You need to invest a little more on the sidewalks. The cost is going to be much less than building the road. But somehow our minds don't go there. Delhi had at one stage, I recall this, decided to build 500 kilometers of good quality sidewalks. And they had even asked WRI to vet the designs that were coming from various contractors, and we did that. But ultimately, they built only 1 kilometer and left it. So that 1 kilometer, which exists somewhere on Aurobindo Marg near the IIT, is very well designed. It costs much less than building the road, but this needs to scale up across Delhi. I think there is just apathy, I would say, not recognizing that these are very important. It needs, I think, a kind of leadership which is willing to recognize this and drive it. See, in Netherlands, which has a very large number, a high proportion of cycling and walking, it didn't happen on its own. It happened because there was a certain leader who came. He was a politically influential leader, and he drove it. And once the infrastructure was set, people found it convenient and kept using that. The temperature and the distances were friendly to that. So, to my mind, this is something that needs a much closer look.
Absolutely. I think you made a very excellent point about how we are designing the entire transport infrastructure in India. And that brings me to another very critical aspect of it is how do we ensure that not only our transportation systems are sustainable, but they are also addressing the unique needs of women, the elderly, and the vulnerable groups, making the urban mobility more inclusive in nature.
Yes, yes, that's a matter of design. See, it's a matter of design. It's a matter of again. I'm using this. I'm not. It shouldn't look. I'm getting critical about engineers. I'm an engineer myself, but engineers have a big problem. They look at engineering solutions. They often don't look at what is convenient for the human being. That's why you need a different, a different mindset to think about designs that are friendly to people. So I think that is really not coming in. Too much of it is getting dominated with a civil engineering mindset. Uh, I would say that needs, these people also maybe need to get a much better exposure to what is needed by people, and not to design something that is convenient from an engineering point of view. So civil engineers are good at building roads. They know how well, what a car user needs, but do they fully understand what a person walking on the road needs or walking on a footpath needs? Have they ever done it themselves? It's only when you do it yourself that you know what you need.
Yeah.
And one other statement I always keep making: the tragedy of public transport is it's planned and designed by people who don't use it.
Unfortunately. You know,
I've often said
something
that for senior officials in the government, uh, if you have to give them a car, give them a fancy car, but don't give them a driver. Let him drive himself and see what the problems of driving on the roads are.
I think they will certainly know better, and hopefully, the design will start reflecting those input. I was just thinking that some of these things have to be, when we talk about sustainability or we talk about climate, it must be embedded into every action and activity we undertake. It has to be that way. Now, unfortunately, that is not how we are progressing. And even if we are, there is a lot of disconnect. Do you think a dedicated climate action ministry would solve this problem?
Not at all. I think that's the wrong way to go. If you want it to be involved with, if you want every segment to be looking at climate, don't have a separate climate action ministry, because then everyone will say, oh, that they will do. Today, that's the problem. You have a Ministry of Environment and Forests,
Yeah,
which has a climate change cell, which has a huge. There's an additional secretary dealing with climate change. Of course, a lot of their focus goes into COPs, but they also have a responsibility for getting action taken, and they don't have the bandwidth to get it done. And everyone else thinks, oh, the climate division will do. No, the climate division should not be doing that. It is something that should be into every sector. Every person should be thinking climate and acting climate. But that will only happen if they understand climate. So the
right.
point that you made about this capacity and knowledge gap, that is the gap that needs to be bridged. A separate climate action ministry will only stall things. It can't happen. Ideally, they should be leading this training program,
Yeah.
but
I
they
think
can't do it everywhere. It's not possible. I say the same thing for gender. If you try to have a separate gender unit, everyone will say, oh, gender they will do. No, but gender has to be thought of right at the design stage everywhere.
absolutely. I'll come back to the topic of EVs because that is certainly the hot topic of this era. Now, electrification of mobility is largely coal dependent in India, while we are making some progress to move to cleaner fuels and resources. It is going to take some time, and also taking into consideration that battery mining involves the mining of rare earth metals, resulting in more emissions and environmental impact. And reuse and disposal of batteries is another concerning area. Now, this often leads to a lot of noise and narratives criticizing EVs. I'd like to address this, ongoing debate for our listeners. Are EVs good for the environment?
So, a lot of this debate that is being talked about is talking without numbers. They're just talking on perception. Oh, there is emissions in battery mining, there is emissions in coal plants. But I do know that multiple studies have been carried out around the world by many, many agencies. Multiple studies have been carried out uh, to see whether EVs are good or not good from a purely climate perspective, from an emissions perspective. I haven't read many of them, but I think that debate has now been settled, pretty much saying that yes, it's good. Despite all those emissions coming from a lot of the feed uh, channels, I think the outcome seems to be that yes, it's good. But let me not sort of get into that. Let me look at it slightly differently. EVs are not merely for climate. Emissions from a coal plant are much easier to manage than to manage emissions from millions of vehicles moving around on the road. Because the coal plant emissions are stationary. It's one location. You can have emission reduction facilities there. You can have cleaner coal there. But vehicles which are moving around all over the city, the emissions that they create is very difficult to control. So I would say that don't look at it only from a climate or the greenhouse gas emissions perspective. Look at it from the point of view of pollution perspective. A lot of the air quality issues in Delhi are because of motor vehicles, IC engine vehicles traveling around in Delhi. What EVs will do is help you control that. That's one positive value that comes out of it. The second, particularly for India, is that we import a lot of our petroleum fuel. The import bill comes down. So quite often, many who are suspicious about EVs are looking at it only from the climate perspective. They're not looking at other benefits that EVs give us. The moment you do that, I think you'll begin to see that EVs have value. Second, yes, the trend is towards moving away from coal. So we are aligning with the trend that is happening. And if we want to do EVs only after most of our electricity is coming from cleaner sources, we'll be too late. EVs are the future the world over. And India as a country wants to be in a leading position to be able to export this to other countries. So from many of the strategic reasons, I think it's good to move towards EVs. As far as batteries are concerned, today, a lot of the rare earth materials, mostly lithium, cobalt, nickel, yes, they are mined. But there is a lot of research going on to look at different kinds of battery chemistries. So, partly those battery chemistries, right now, the focus is on using materials that are available in India. Otherwise, the materials being used today for those batteries, very little of that is available in India. But a lot of research is about looking at, say, sodium or looking at solid state, which can be done in India. We don't have to depend on imports for that. So research is also in the direction which will make EVs even better. So I think the move to EVs is the right thing to happen. Where we are seeing a bit of a challenge on EVs right now, and I'm sure that will also come around, is a lot of the EV penetration, so to say, has happened in urban areas. But as I mentioned, a large share of the emissions from transport are in highway trucks. So moving to electrification of highway trucks is going to be the big thing that's going to happen. Can we think of heavy duty trucks getting electric? So there is work happening. Many corporates have agreed to try out a certain number of highway trucks. There are a few challenges on financing and others, which I think with time will get sorted out. But I think that is the big area which needs attention.
Right. Um, I think that certainly is a helpful perspective on how we look at EVs, because climate certainly is one aspect to it, and there are a few more important aspects. Uh, I feel EVs are also helping with noise pollution, and certainly it will help with air pollution, which is a major crisis, public health crisis that we are dealing with. Now, I would certainly want to focus a little bit on the policy aspect around EV. So recently, PME drive policy replaced FAME 2, signaling a new approach to electrification. How do you view its potential for accelerating EV adoption in India?
See, I honestly don't think it has come up with a new approach as such. I think in many ways it's pretty much similar, except that it is adding a lot more emphasis, which is needed. That emphasis is needed. It has also focused a little more on types of vehicles, which I think is good. Because honestly, let me give you another. I drive about 20 or 30 kilometers in a day. Now, if I drive only 20 or 30 kilometers in a day and I'm paid a subsidy by the government to shift to an electric car, what's the public value in this? I'm not saving very much. Frankly, even the
That's
economics of that shift is not good, because electric vehicle shift is good if you're traveling longer distances.
yeah.
So what the PM e-bus, this new program is emphasizing a lot more of public transport. It's emphasizing vehicles that are used more intensively in the day. So other than that, I think the it has not suggested a new approach. It said let's focus a little more on vehicles that actually give us benefits. I also see that this is again the positive thing. A lot of people are shifting to EVs for a variety of reasons. I don't fully understand them, but the number of EVs I see every day, I see more EVs in the area that I live in. I feel very happy about it. But I think that that's a very positive development that's happened in India. As I said earlier, the growth in EVs has been far faster than I ever thought it would be. I think what has also contributed to this is a lot of the suppliers or manufacturers have also tied up with people who provide charging facilities. So if you provide a vehicle, you have a charge point operator or some charging equipment supplier who's linked with this. He'll come home, set it up for you. Now, if that has happened, why won't I shift to an EV? I like the look of an EV. It makes less noise. And if I'm traveling about 60 or 70 kilometers in a day, it's even cheaper for me. So I think we are on a good track on EVs. We are on a good track on EVs.
Right. I think it is certainly emerging as a city vehicle for sure, if not for long distances, because in all fairness, we still do not have the reliable infrastructure for charging for longer distance. And I think having charging facilities at home is certainly a make or break deal for EVs. And the more we are focusing on that aspect, it's going to help with the adoption.
So there are certain mid distances, the certain mid distances where I also see this. For example, I travel to IIT Roorkee quite often. And a number of times when I have come back from Roorkee, they've dropped me in an electric vehicle of the institute. So there's an electric vehicle of the institute which drives me back to Delhi. And I've asked the driver, look, charge करने में problem तो नहीं होगा? He says, no, no, there's no problem. He drives me from Roorkee, drops me here, then goes and charges somewhere and goes back. So he doesn't need any intermediate charging locations. So this is for distances of, I think, 200, 250 kilometers. This is possible in a car.
Right.
Earlier, it wasn't that much. It was only about 100, 150 kilometers. Today, that improvement has happened. But I think things will only improve. Things will only get easier.
What do you think is the next phase or the next steps that you would recommend to policymakers and industry stakeholders to further accelerate the transition to EVs?
I think, so far what has happened is a lot of incentives have been given for shifting to EVs. We still don't have disincentives for continuing with the older kind of vehicle. The economics of an electric vehicle depends on what is the price of electricity or what is the price of the vehicle and what is the price of petrol or diesel and the price of the petrol or diesel car. I think a time has come when we need to nudge that shift even faster by making IC engine vehicles more expensive, higher taxes on them, and increasing the price of petroleum fuels. So far it's been more a pull effect. It hasn't been that push effect. As I said, for any political government, the pull effect is all right. A push effect is politically uh, not very good for them. That's why they try to avoid that. I think it's been sensible so far, but I think a gentle nudge in that direction will be helpful.
There's another interesting top point I have come across often when we discuss about different industries involved when we talk about transport system as a whole. So, for example, the electricity and automobile industries have traditionally not worked closely, and with EVs particularly requiring a seamless integration of these two sectors, particularly, how can we foster better collaboration for success? Because unless we have a more integrated approach to it, there will always be these gaps that we are talking about, and some policies will keep favoring something, but then there will be loopholes in other. How do we address this, and how can we make these policies more collaborative for all industries, so they all can come together and work towards the goal of decarbonizing transportation?
So I think it is happening. It's not, I've seen this from the early stages about 5 or 6 years ago to now. I think there is a big change already happening. But, where the gaps, at least when we started, where it was government in its enthusiasm, for example, said that NTPC should set up 500 charging stations. Because NTPC is the supplier of electricity, said
Yeah.
set up 500 or some 1,000 charging stations, which is a good thing. You're asking NTPC to set it up because no one else was there at that time. It's a good move to do. But then where did NTPC set it up? They would only set it up at places where they have land conveniently available. So many of them set it up close to where they have substations.
Yeah.
But then, if you look at the movement pattern on the city, is that where people travel? Is that part of the travel route of people close to substations of electricity distribution companies? Perhaps not. So, what municipal corporations have to do, or city administrations have to do, is to get movement patterns identified, get movement patterns tracked, see how people move, see where people stop, and then identify land at those places and say, set it up here. Now, over the years, uh, petrol pumps have got located in places where people travel to quite often. So, where petrol pumps are today located are, with experience, they are now good locations to go to. Can we think of setting up charging stations at those places? So, this is where electricity agencies and oil companies need to come together. Because the move is going to happen away from petroleum. The dealer of that petrol pump will soon lose business if he continues only on petrol. But if he moves to charging, he may get additional business coming in. Then the other thing which is coming up is swapping. Now, what happens with charging is that if you're setting up a charging station in place of a petrol pump, to serve the same number of vehicles in a day, you need much more space. Because charging may take 3 hours, but filling up a car with petrol takes 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So you need a lot more space. Now, swapping is a very interesting thing because swapping is something where your battery is removed from the car and a new battery, which is charged, is put into the car. It's like what we used to have with LPG cylinders. Now, that takes 5 minutes. Now, that same petrol pump, if it takes up a swapping business, in the 5 minutes it can remove the battery, put in a new battery, and then swap the battery or charge the battery at a location just behind the petrol pump or something. Where for charging the battery, you don't need space that you need for keeping a car. A battery occupies much less space. You can have 200 batteries being charged in one small room. So these are we have to give it time because things are evolving, and the automobile industry, the electricity industry, the petroleum industry for some time will have to work closely together for what I call the handover. Handing over from one technology to the other technology will take a bit of time. But I must say it's happening. It's happening right.
Right. I think battery swapping is certainly an interesting and interesting solution that we should look at scaling up. I know some of the players like Battery Smart, they are doing some work in this space, but I think that is still right now focused to three wheelers in India. I want to know if you can maybe think of any global or national examples when we think of a truly successful sustainable transport system from which India could probably learn a lesson or two, or there are a few things that we can adapt.
See, there are two cities that I admire globally, and I think they have are the two cities that have cracked this whole issue well. One is Singapore, the other is Seoul in South Korea. And the one unique thing that I've seen with both these cities is, apart from what I call supply management. Supply management means if you need more, you supply more. So if you need more public transport capacity, you build more metros or you provide more buses. Or if you need more for cars, you provide more road space. They have adopted demand management also in collaboration with supply. So, what demand management means is trying to control the demand. Singapore, for example, has very heavy taxes on purchase of a personal motor vehicle. If you have the money, you can't just go to a shop and buy a vehicle. You have to first buy a permit to get a vehicle. It's called a certificate of entitlement. And those certificates of entitlement are auctioned once in 15 days, and you have to bid for it. Quite often, the bid amount is the price of the vehicle itself. So your cost of getting a car has doubled. Then you have very heavy registration charges for motor vehicles. And that goes to as much as 100% of the cost of the car. So if you have a three times the cost of the car is what you have to spend to buy that car itself, you'll think three times. Simultaneously, they have an excellent public transport system. It's not a metro which is just a heart placed in a human body. It has the whole set of network of veins and arteries and all of that. They've done this. So the demand management measures have come in as a very good supplement to supply management. Same thing with Seoul. See, what Seoul has done amazingly is they demolished flyovers. They demolished, I think, when during the time of one particular mayor, they invested very heavily in building multiple metro lines, 8 metro lines, very high quality reform of the bus systems. They invested a lot in that. But at the same time, they also demolished about 42 flyovers across the city. And they have taken space away from cars to build much better footpaths. So this is also a measure of demand management. That means I'm giving you good public transport, but I'm taking space away from you for personal car use. So I think this is what we need to do. We need to start now investing a lot more on demand management, along with whatever we are doing on supply management. So these are two cities I admire. I think our whole ambition should be that in a certain period of time from now, the need for people to have personal motor vehicles should go. We have good public transport, we have good walking, so the walking, cycling plus public transport should be able to meet all our travel needs. We don't need a personal motor vehicle. I think that's the ambition with which public policy needs to work.
And when we talk about policymakers' role and government's role and industry's role, I often also like to focus on what is the role communities and individuals can play in being part of the solution for sure, and also not being part of the problem. So, what would you recommend for individuals and communities to empower themselves and, be part of solutions when it comes to creating a sustainable transportation system in India?
Make the demand. In a democracy, how do politicians behave? Politicians behave in a manner to satisfy their voters. The voters start saying, look, I want this, I want this. Politicians will serve that. I mean, that's the beauty of democracy, that if people start demanding certain things, politics meets that demand. But it can't be one person or two-person. It can't be you and me, is not enough. It has to be, so communities need to be educated, communities need to understand what's good for them. It doesn't have to be by telling them this is the right thing to do, but the way to do that is to sort of make them realize on their own, self-discovery as I call it, uh, learn on their own, recognize on their own that this is the way we need to go. And when they start making demand, things will happen. I was in Kochi once, and there was some event organized by the Kochi Metro. And at that event, I was very surprised to see many people, local level leaders, saying that we never wanted this metro. It's cost us so much and hardly anyone uses it. And they say that this was a decision taken only at the state level without even consulting us. They went to Government of India, fought with Government of India. I remember at the Government of India, there was so much pressure coming to us from the state level for getting the Kochi Metro approved. I was very surprised to see at the local level, people are not really, they feel it's been a waste of money. So I think, it's very important for people to recognize what is good for them and start talking about it, making noise of it, making those demands. That's how politics responds in a democracy. And this is where I think a lot of civil society or think tanks can come in and help create that awareness. Media can create that awareness. People like you can create that awareness.
Absolutely, sir. I think certainly there is a need for creating that awareness. But I also often fear that you made a point about we need to have that self discovery. I think, given how the complex modern life or life itself that we are living today, that self discovery is going to take a lot of time. And I don't think personally we have that much time. So, whatever nudge, as we say, Sam, Dam, Dan, Bhed, we need to do everything in this context to have everyone in this puzzle, whether it is the government, the industry, people, communities, come together and work for the solution.
Very true, very true. Now, why I mentioned self discovery is again, this is from experience. I have been conducting a number of training programs on urban transport. And what I've often said is, I don't want to use the method that is used in our universities, where they have primarily it's lecture. So, what happens in a lecture is you have a professor who's telling the student what is the right thing. So, the student will listen to it and say, okay, how much he retains, you don't know. But a lot of my programs are not really students in university, they are practitioners, mid career practitioners. And I use the approach of case studies with them. So, the case study is a problem situation. You give them a problem, and then you have a discussion on, okay, how are we going to solve this problem? When they think about it in a classroom environment, along with many of their peers, they themselves come up with the solutions. And I say, when you come up with a solution yourself, no one has told you that, you've come up with it. That's self discovery. And your ownership of that solution is much stronger if you have found that solution, rather than someone telling you what the solution is. Now, it may not work for all the whole class, but it works for many of them. And that is lasting.
One advice that you would like to give to the younger generation, and I think this generation is far better when it comes to being aware about climate. What would that advice be? And two, how would a decarbonized, sustainable Indian transportation sector look like to you in 2050?
I think the younger generation is doing a much better job than what my generation did already. In the sense, if you look at, again, I like to tell stories. My generation thought of the car as a status symbol. So many of them bought cars partly because they wanted the convenience of the car. We didn't have alternatives which were convenient enough as you do have today. We didn't have an Uber then. If you wanted a taxi, you have to go out to the road and hope you find a taxi. We didn't have the option of calling something on the phone and knowing you'll get it. So, partly for a convenience sake, partly for a status symbol sake, we bought personal motor vehicles. Today's younger generation is not necessarily doing that. For them, the car, for many that I've seen, the car is not a status symbol. What may be a status symbol is a good phone. That's more, what kind of a phone is the person using. So with the result, they would rather not buy a car but use that money to get a good phone, which is a good sign. So in WRI, when I used to work in Delhi office, I found I was the only guy going in a car. Most of them were youngsters. They would either take the metro and come or take an Uber or something and come. They weren't really coming in their own cars. So I've often said the younger generation is doing the right thing, something that my generation messed up. The younger generation is doing a good thing. So I would say kudos to them. So I think that's been happening well. I hope it sustains. I hope they keep it up. They don't get disappointed that we've not provided the facilities and then switch to cars. As far as my advice is, as I said, uh, I see the future, if it's going in the right way, is much more electric and shared, much more public transport, walking and cycling. I think the need for a personal motor vehicle needs to get obviated. The amount of space that we are using up in cities where land is scarce, but being used up for parking is criminal in many ways.
Yeah.
Let's not waste precious urban land for parking our cars, which we use for barely 5% of the day, and 95% of the time we are occupying that land without paying for it. I think that needs to sort of come down. That will be my advice.
And how do you think our Indian transportation sector will look like in 2050, let's say?
I hope it's all electric and all shared. No personal vehicle. That's my dream. But then today I'm no longer in a situation where I can be sitting in the driver's seat. But I hope that people who've taken over the mantle from me will drive that also.
Well, let's close this session and discussion on that note of optimism, because that is something we certainly need. Thank you so much, sir. I think this conversation was very insightful, and hopefully, we have left our listeners with a lot of information, lot of perspective to many debates that's going on, and most importantly, the roles that we can play in not just demanding the solutions from the government about creating a better infrastructure, but also being part of the solution.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Arpita. Thanks for inviting me to this conversation. Enjoyed it thoroughly. I hope I've answered your questions to your satisfaction or your expectation.
Absolutely, sir.
But a
Absolutely.
delight talking to you.
As we heard today, transitioning to green and clean mobility isn't just about adopting electric vehicles. It's about reimagining the way we move, think, and act as a society. It is a monumental task, but one that's absolutely essential for a cleaner, healthier future. Thank you for joining in today. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to She Talks Green and share it with others. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow us on YouTube and Spotify and join the movement for a greener tomorrow. Until next time, stay inspired, stay informed, and keep talking green. If you have any questions, do share it with us and we will definitely get experts to answer them.